Um, I'm Lisa, and I have anxiety and depression with a side of ADHD. This is when you all say, "Hi, Lisa." Thank you. With that background, after working for about 30 years in a law firm in New York City, I decided, what would be a really great idea? How about if I go to Washington, D.C., having never been in politics before, and I run a federal agency, and I have countless speeches and interviews and all of those types of things, and I testify before the United States Congress, try to get confirmed by the Senate, and work with people in the White House. That seems like a really great idea for somebody who is anxious and, it's not really like when you turn on the Calm app, and put in your symptoms, they say, this will help you, so do that. But, anyway, not the version that I got. But the federal agency that I was leading was not just any federal agency. It was the agency that is in charge of safeguarding the job-based retirement and health plans and health benefits of more than 150 million American workers and their families, and including protecting mental health benefits. So making sure that when we have more access to care and that people are not facing greater barriers trying to go to get care for mental health conditions than they do for any medical and surgical condition, which seems like an obvious thing, but it's not so obvious. I was helping to build the system, but at the same time, I was quietly spiraling myself within it. So here I am today, again, making a wonderful personal life decision to stand on this red dot and talk with all of you. Clearly someone needs to have a conversation with me, but here I am. So on stage, I was confident. I was on message. I was just killing it, going out there, talking about all these complicated things. But off stage, I was spiraling. And a lot of the reasons for that was not just because I had certain conditions, but also because I was dealing with and fighting, challenging my own stigma and biases against myself and how much I should be talking about, what I was feeling, what I was going through, but also external bias and external stigma. And this was something I can't go in and say, I was fine till I got to Washington and they really, messed me up. I mean, I walked into this job with anxiety, with depression. It was like a carry-on that I just brought with me everywhere. And I walked into meetings and I had my job qualifications and I had my work ethic and I also had mental health conditions. But, two of those things are much easier to talk about with your coworkers than the third one, and I'll, let you guess which one that is. I was advocating for people that had mental health conditions and that needed care, needed greater access to be able to see doctors and get the medications that they need. And at the same time, I was going home to my apartment and just catastrophizing. I like that word, so I needed to make sure that I said it. Catastrophizing. It sounds like really, but I was, thinking of everything that's possibly going to go wrong, thinking about every horrible thing that everyone was probably thinking about me, that I wasn't a good leader, that I wasn't doing a good job, that I wasn't qualified. How did I get there? And I was also just thinking, this is all pointless. Why am I even showing up? Why should I even bother going to do any of this on any day? And, even when you're working in an environment where people are mental health advocates, where people are more than sympathetic, trying to be supportive workplaces, supportive colleagues, it doesn't always feel safe to say, everybody, I'm actually not okay. It doesn't feel safe to, instead of saying, you know what, sorry I'm a little late today, but I had a real headache when I woke up, to be, saying that instead of saying, I just could not get myself out of bed this morning. It's definitely a different thing. And that's because of silence and stigma. So, and implicit bias. So, I was constantly telling people, you need to take the oxygen down for yourself first, whether you're a mom or a dad or a leader, you always have to be doing that first. Take care of yourself, because how can you take care of other people if you're not taking care of yourself? And, surprise, surprise, was being a complete hypocrite, not doing that for myself. Do as I say, not as I do. But, when leaders open up, we, some of the responses that happen are not necessarily like, can we help her? Can we help you? How can we help make you, help you to be strong? It's like, well, maybe we should take that away from her. Maybe we should take these things off her plate. Maybe she's not the right person to have do these things. And even asking the leader themselves, like, Lisa, are you sure you really want to talk about that in this op-ed that you're putting out? Are you sure you really want to be vulnerable? And I would always say, how can I go and tell people that we can't have stigma if I myself can't talk about it? So I needed to do that, but let me tell you, even for this speech, because, in part, I'm someone that obsesses over every single thing. Ever since I decided what I wanted to do my TED Talk on, I was reconsidering that every single day, including today, when I told some people, maybe I will just talk about chewing gum. I can do an entire thing about chewing gum and the flavors of gum and which ones are better. And so, if I really start losing it and I start talking about chewing gum, that I have hit that point and that it was not supposed to go that way. But I'll try to act like it was. But we often live in silence, in the workplace, we're often looked at, I'm looking to make sure where I am, we're also often thinking about workplace culture like a tailored suit. You think of a tailored suit, and it's very nicely pressed and smooth, put together, well stitched, and everybody, expects you're coming into work, if you unfortunately have to wear a suit, that you're coming in, everything is nice and neat. But when something starts to unravel in that suit, people don't necessarily come up and say to you, let me cut off that little thread that's coming loose, or, let me help you, come in the back room, I see you have a stain. A lot of people just panic and think, well, let's not tell her that, or we're going to pretend that we don't notice that there's something wrong with that perfect suit. And the last thing they want to do is pull the thread, because then, who knows what's going to happen. But instead, when it comes to mental health, rather than pulling that thread and rather than really getting into things that might be messy, we're often doing things like giving you a yoga mat. The yoga mat will make you feel better. Or maybe you can have a mental health day. Have a mental health day. Maybe you'll feel better with that. But please don't tell me, if you felt unwell on your mental health day, please do not tell me how you felt unwell, because I really don't want to hear about that. You can come in tomorrow. If you took a day off because you were sick, you can tell me the next day you're feeling better, whatever. Mental health day, don't come back. We'll just, we'll just be quiet about that. This is something that all really comes down to implicit bias. And we talk about implicit bias a lot in the context of maybe race and gender, and how there are things that maybe even the people who are the most well-intentioned people, you don't really realize how your inner thoughts or inner perceptions, things that you've just developed over the course of your life, how they influence your decisions. But we do have a lot of implicit bias when it comes to mental health. And again, it's not something that if you are, self-diagnosed or diagnosed by someone as having implicit bias, that you're a bad person. It's just something for you to recognize that you have and that you're, trying to deal with. So, and it does come up because we have times when, someone goes in for an organ transplant and they come back to work and, we are doing balloons and we buy a cake from the grocery store and we're saying, welcome back. But if someone was in the hospital and coming back from rehab because, they had a relapse during recovery, we're usually just trying to hope we don't see them in the hallways and not going to ask about that. Bias can also be the form of what I call quiet sabotage. When you are a leader and you are open and vulnerable, there are people that weaponize that openness, and that's a form of strategic cruelty because you're finding someone's weakness and really, pulling away at that. And silence from colleagues just multiplies that damage. And people just look at you and say, you're a leader, you seem so strong, you did all these things. People are surprised because they don't realize that silence doesn't equal strength and that the helper is not immune. But we are always shocked when we find out that the helper needs help and that the leader has now disappeared and we didn't expect that. And for me, that was not a new chapter in my life. That was the backdrop to my whole life. And it still is, but I'm working now on reweaving the system. Thinking about, and I want to start off by saying I'm not trashing anybody's colorful, coloring, mindless mural, that you might have, or your team building activities. Those are all good, but they're just putting a wellness filter on a bad system. And we need to recognize that there is bias and that there is stigma. Realize that real support comes when you ask someone, what do you need? How can we help you? And just not punishing someone for being vulnerable and exploiting that, but rather to celebrate the strength in leadership that comes from vulnerability. Looking at the root causes of mental health issues at work, like toxic environments, low pay, not too much expectation of perfection and those types of things. And you're not going to be able to gratitude journal yourself out of those issues. You really have to attack them head on. So just things that I've learned. I've learned that advocacy, being a good advocate, does not mean that you have to be fixed. I've learned that being honest is the right thing, and showing up afraid is also the right thing, just as long as you're showing up. I don't want you to, cry for me, Argentina, as Eva Perón never, ever said. But, this is not my own therapy. I'm paying someone, money for that. But thank you for being here. But, I live with anxiety and depression and with ADHD. I also ran a federal agency. I've also been grilled by Congress. And I'm also crazily doing this TEDx talk voluntarily. But Unraveling did not disqualify me from being a good leader. I think that it made me a better leader. It made me more human. And it really made me think that I was going to do everything in my capacity to be able to fight for people who are living in silence, and so that they are never, living in silence and shouting for other people while they're internally, not being able to shout for themselves. So wish me luck, and hopefully no more bad decisions before I leave Fargo.